Welcome to the night section.
I didn't do this stuff. This is not me. I'm fighting for my life. R. Kelly screamed those words, pounding his chest, standing over Gayle King in that infamous 2019 interview. The tears streaming down his face, the desperation, the shouting. It was the performance of a man whose empire was crashing down.
It's destroying my name, and I can't work. How can I work? How can I get paid? How can I take care of my kids?
Fast forward 3 years in a hushed New York courtroom packed with press, lawyers, and survivors. The judge reads the sentence: 30 years in prison. Months later, another 20 years were added by a Chicago jury. The king of R&B, the same man who wrote I Believe I Can Fly, was now a convicted predator. But how did we get here? We are talking about a man who sold over 75 million records worldwide, sang at the Olympics, and dominated the Billboard charts for decades. Also spent those same years running what survivors called a cult. As we look back, the questions grow. How did he abuse, manipulate, and control young girls and women, often in plain sight, and walk away untouched for nearly 30 years? This is not the story of a fallen star. This is the story of a predator who hid in the spotlight. This is the story of how R. Kelly built a career on charm, money, and manipulation while hiding monstrous crimes. Chicago South Side, 1967. Robert Sylvester Kelly was born into poverty in the Ida B. Wells Homes housing projects riddled with crime and instability. His father was absent and his mother struggled to keep the household afloat. And behind closed doors, Robert carried a heavy secret. He would later admit that he was repeatedly abused in the worst way by family members and neighbors from as young as 8 years old. By 13, he's already been shot in the shoulder while riding his bike. Some say it was in a robbery attempt. Academically, Kelly struggled with dyslexia and eventually dropped out of high school. But in all that chaos, there was one escape. And for Robert, it was music. Kelly sang in his church choir, began street performing in Chicago subways, and it would be a high school teacher at Kenwood Academy that would notice his raw talent. However, the breakthrough would come in 1992 when he debuted with the group Public Announcement. Not too long after, about a year later, he dropped his first solo album, 12 Play, and suddenly everyone knew his name. Bump and Grind shot to #1. By 1996, his gospel-inspired I Believe I Can Fly was everywhere. Played at graduations, sporting events, and even Space Jam. R. Kelly earning 3 Grammys soon followed. It was like he became untouchable. The industry crowned him the king of R&B, selling out arenas, writing hits from Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, and Celine Dion, dominating every chart. He toured the world, sold millions of records, and filled stadiums. Fans loved and worshipped him. The industry profited off him. He truly was unstoppable. But beneath the platinum records, the red flags had already started to show. The whispers had already begun, hinting at a troubling reality under the surface. It's now 1991, and Kelly is 24 when he meets a bright-eyed 12-year-old prodigy named Aaliyah Houghton. Shy, soft-spoken, but with a voice that could melt an entire room. Kelly positioned himself as mentor, writer, and producer for her debut album. Its title, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, written by R. Kelly himself. To the public, they were just mentor and protege, but insiders knew something else. By 1994, the whispers turned into a scandal. Kelly had secretly married Aaliyah. She was just 15, he was 27. The marriage certificate, exposed later by Vibe magazine, had been forged to say she was 18. Reports suggested Kelly pushed for the marriage after Aaliyah thought she might be pregnant. Yikes. When the truth broke, it shocked the industry. The marriage was quickly annulled at her parents' demand, and Aaliyah cut ties and never spoke of him publicly again. This was the first undeniable proof of R. Kelly's predatory behavior. He had married someone underage, and he got away with it. No charges, no consequences, and the industry looked the other way. Now, of course, Kelly continued to make hits hits, and it seemed like the world moved on. However, after Aaliyah, the pattern continued. Lawsuits began piling up. In 1996, Tiffany Hawkins sued Kelly, claiming she was just 15 when their intimate relationship began. She alleged he encouraged her to bring other minors into his circle. The case ended up settling in 1998 for $250,000, with a non-disclosure agreement silencing her. She later attempted self-deletion due to the trauma. In 1997, Tracy Sampson, an intern at Epic Records, sued in 2001, saying she was 17 when Kelly initiated another intimate relationship. Patrice Jones filed suit claiming she became pregnant with Kelly's child at 16 and was pressured into getting rid of the baby. Then Montina Woods accused him of recording them being intimate without her knowledge. One by one, Kelly settled and the cases disappeared from headlines. Now, by the early 2000s, investigative reporters Jim DeRogatis and Abdon Palish at the Chicago Sun-Times began digging. They uncovered police investigations into Kelly going back to the mid-90s, finding that witnesses often refused to testify and settlements kept the stories buried. It's almost as if the money kept Kelly safe. DeRogatis said, quote, "A successful superstar was his own character witness. Nobody wanted to believe the stories were true, and so the silence held. Parents still sent their daughters to him, hoping for a record deal, and in sick fashion, record labels looked the other way. The entire music industry ignored it. As long as Kelly was making money, no one wanted to believe, but in 2002, something surfaced that no one could ignore. It was February 2002, and an anonymous videotape landed in the mailbox of the Chicago Sun-Times reporter Jim DeRogatis. The tape showed R. Kelly engaging in, let's just say, inappropriate acts with a girl who appeared to be as young as 14 years old. At one point, and you guys can put the pieces together, bodily fluids were involved. The tape was horrifying. On February 8th, 2002, the Sun-Times broke the story to the public, and that very same week, R. Kelly performed at the Winter Olympics opening ceremony, oblivious that evidence of his crimes had, no pun intended, leaked out. The tape quickly circulated. The girl was identified as the niece of Kelly's longtime protege, singer Sparkle. Then prosecutors charged Kelly with 21 counts of CSAM. He ended up being arrested at his Florida vacation home and extradited. Police in Florida even searched his house and found 12 crude digital photos of the same girl.
Related to child pornography, enticement of a minor, and obstruction of justice. And this is on top
Now,
of...
we are all thinking it should have ended there, but Kelly's empire was skilled at buying silence. Now, the alleged victim denied it was her on a tape. Turns out she and her family refused to testify. In 2008, 6 years after the tape surfaced, the case finally went to trial. The prosecution showed the tape to jurors who were required to compare the tape to Kelly's live appearance.
Repeatedly on the video, both the victim and Mr. Kelly refer to the victim's age as being 14.
Kelly pleaded not guilty, and obviously his lawyers argued it wasn't him. And it was June 2008 that Kelly was acquitted on all charges. His supporters cheered, and Kelly walked out of that courthouse a free man. Now, he celebrated the way he always did by releasing more music. Y'all remember Step in the Name of Love? Well, the song became one of his biggest hits, and like he always did, he toured the world. Fans cheered. It seemed like he had truly beaten the system. But that acquittal did one thing more than free him. It taught him how to survive legal storms and coached his inner circle what to do when trouble came knocking. However, it was a devastating moment for survivors. Despite clear evidence, the system had failed. Kelly was untouchable, or so it seemed. His private world would only get darker. By the 2000s, Kelly's career had shifted but not slowed. While he was no longer topping the charts like the 90s, his tours still drew thousands. Behind the scenes, he had built something far darker. In 2017, BuzzFeed published an explosive expose. Parents alleged Kelly was running a Smex cult, holding young women in his homes in Atlanta and Chicago. The article described rules. The women had to call him daddy. They were told when to eat, when to bathe, how to dress, when to use the bathroom, and were even forbidden from speaking to other men, including family. Breaking his rules could mean physical punishment. One mother claimed her daughter vanished into Kelly's world after attending a backstage meet and greet. When she tried to rescue her, she said her daughter insisted she was fine, but spoke in a monotone voice as if coached. Another mother recounted how her 19-year-old daughter, a singer, had sought mentorship from Kelly, and how the last time she saw her, quote, "It was as if she was brainwashed. She looked like a prisoner. It was horrible," end quote. Another woman's father said, quote, "My daughter is being held against her will. All I want to do is bring her home. This is a cult," end quote. One personal assistant of Kelly's, Cheryl Mack, described him as a master at mind control, a puppet master. Those accounts added a new dimension. This was not just illegal activities with minors, it was coercive control that was happening for a prolonged period. These descriptions would mirror future testimonies years later, showing a continuity of his abusive methods, and as you can imagine, the story sparked public outrage. Atlanta-based activist Kenyette Barnes and arts consultant Oronike Odlai in July 2017 launched the hashtag #MuteRKelly campaign in 2017 and rallied protesters. The movement called for boycotting Kelly's music and canceling his concert. Protesters rallied under the hashtag #MuteRKelly, demanding radio stations and streaming platforms to stop playing his music. Social media gave survivors a louder voice than ever before, and for the first time, the public began to see him not as an untouchable star, but as a predator hiding in plain sight. But of course, Kelly denied it all. He went on Instagram saying, quote, "I'm not running a cult. I'm a man, I'm a rock star, and I'm innocent," end quote. Later, January 2019, Lifetime released Surviving R. Kelly. The 6-part docuseries featured over 50 interviews, survivors, journalists, parents, former employees, all detailing years of abuse, control, and manipulation. Dozens of women spoke on camera, ex-girlfriends, former assistants, and even his ex-wife, Andrea Kelly, who sat down and detailed the systematic abuse, the coercion, and the terror that had been their lives. It was a cultural earthquake. Social media exploded. This time the public could not look away. Hashtags like Surviving R. Kelly and #MuteRKelly surged with outrage. The interviews were direct, raw, and unanimously it was the same storyline over and over again. Grooming, isolation, beating, starvation, imprisonment, coercion, and silence enforced by money, blackmail, and threats. This led to his label, Sony/RCA Records, severing ties with R. Kelly on January 18, 2019. Within weeks, promoters and collaborators began to distance themselves. Streaming numbers dropped. Artists like John Legend and Lady Gaga apologized for collaborating with him. Chance the Rapper admitted he had ignored survivors, and activists in general demanded action. In Chicago, State Attorney Kim Foxx appealed to victims to come forward while the case was building against him, and let's just say the calls poured in. As well as in Georgia, the Fulton County DA also began an open investigation against Kelly. It's like the narrative finally changed. It was no longer a matter of a disputed tape from 2 decades ago. A voice was finally being given to his decades of victims. It was as if the documentary cracked the wall of silence and fear that had held the victims from speaking up. In February 2019, Kelly was indicted in Cook County, Illinois, on 10 counts of aggravated criminal abuse with 3 minors. It was looking like a steep hill to hell for R. Kelly, so his attorney attempted to set up an interview to hopefully sway public opinion about the documentary and charges against him. him. So in March 2019, Kelly agreed to sit with Gayle King in a CBS interview he hoped would absolve him. But instead of clearing his name, he unraveled on national TV. His composure frayed. He shouted, pounded his chest, and broke into tears, screaming, "I'm fighting for my life." His voice cracked. He pleaded. It was raw, it was chaotic, and it was damning. He misused legal terms and answered questions about teenage girls with a phrase that stopped viewers cold.
Robert.
30 years of my career! Y'all trying to kill me!
Quote, when you say teenage, how old we talking? End quote. The interview definitely didn't exonerate him, and the meltdown became viral proof of a man cornered. It reinforced public perception of his guilt and strengthened the prosecutor's case in the court of public opinion. Days later, he was arrested on multiple charges, and the walls had finally cracked. The docuseries, the journalists, and witness cooperation triggered a coordinated federal action on two separate indictments. Come July 2019, Kelly was arrested. He was indicted in New York on multiple federal charges, after which Chicago followed. The trial was brutal. Over weeks, dozens of witnesses testified about a repeatable pattern of abuse, control, and the role of enablers who facilitated access. Survivors testified in graphic detail about rules, punishments, starvation, physical abuse, and forced baby deletions. Jurors heard about forged documents, intimidation, and enablers who kept Kelly insulated. On September 27, 2021, the jury found Kelly guilty on all counts. The maximum sentence, life in prison. The judge in New York sentenced Kelly to 30 years in federal prison to add salt on the wound. The judge scolded him for using his fame and power to lure young victims into his orbit, then isolating them to fully control them. Meanwhile, Chicago prosecuted separate federal charges tied to videotapes, CSAM, and local victims. It became a full circle moment when the girl from the 2002 tape was convinced to finally testify against Kelly. She confirmed being 14 years old in the tape and admitted Kelly and his team had bribed and intimidated her family from testifying in 2008. Now, in February 2023, a federal judge imposed additional prison time concurrent with his New York term, adding 20 more years, effectively ensuring Kelly will be behind bars for decades. The judge ordered all but 1 year of the new sentence to run concurrently with the existing sentence, making Kelly's sentence 31 years behind bars. Now, the question everyone kept asking, how did he get away with it for so long? The answer itself is structural in society. Fame gave him credibility. Money bought silence. NDAs and settlements silenced allegations. An entourage of gatekeepers and enablers, plus parents and fans who ignored warning signs in search of opportunity. As a caveat, there's also the cultural disbelief about the claims of black women and girls. It was a case of corruption with multiple accomplices in a society accustomed to looking away, but the internet era, along with the hashtag #MuteRKelly and the Me Too movement, encouraged survivors to speak up. For survivors, the conviction was a public vindication. It was a relief. For the fans, it had forever tainted the music. For the industry, it highlighted their contribution in enabling and lack of accountability. For the public, it was evidence that power can be checked when survivors speak and systems can sometimes listen. It was finally justice. Now, in light of Kelly's federal convictions, other charges were eventually dropped, including the Cook County, Illinois charges. And just a little over a year ago, on October 7th, 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear R. Kelly's appeal of his 2022 federal conviction in Chicago for CSAM, and let's just say enticing minors for intimacy, leaving the Chicago conviction and its 20-year sentence intact. On February 12, 2025, 2005, a federal appeals court, Second Circuit, upheld his racketeering and sex trafficking convictions and his 30-year New York sentence. By June 2025, the Supreme Court closed the door entirely, refusing to hear his last appeal for the New York sentence. With that ruling, Kelly's path back to freedom narrows to near nothing, but his name still surfaces. In June 2025, reports broke that he had overdosed inside prison. His attorneys claimed he had been poisoned by medication. Prosecutors dismissed it as baseless. Crazy how he has fallen. R. Kelly, once the master of his own world, now at the mercy of the system he spent decades dodging. And in a quiet cell in Butner, R. Kelly waits out the years as the world writes the final verses of his fall. This is not only a story about one man, it is a story about how institutions, culture, and society can bend towards protecting power. It is about survivors who waited decades for justice and journalists who kept asking questions, and it asks the dark question: how many other predators have similar safety nets? R. Kelly's story is a warning that celebrity worship can be weaponized unless systems change. But at least the horrific ordeal is finally over. For decades, R. Kelly's music was the soundtrack of weddings, graduations, and celebrations. His music soared while his victims were silenced. His downfall raises an uncomfortable truth. It wasn't just Kelly. It's a story of complicity. It was an industry. Managers, bodyguards, assistants, record labels, and even parents and fans who looked away, who built a wall of protection around him, who ignored the truth for years. But his story remains as a warning. When we idolize stars too much to see their sins, the cost is always paid by the vulnerable. So who will you believe next time?